Welcome to this Tuesday special interview on the Think Tanks Wellcast. This is Karan Dev, and I'm very excited to be joined by Swapan Dasgupta, who is a member of parliament in the Rajya Sabha and one of India's leading public intellectuals. He is a senior politician and leader of the Bharatiya Janata Party, as well as a celebrated author and columnist. He is an authority on a number of topics, so we're about to get his views on some big questions. So I hope you enjoy this conversation which I'm about to have. Mr. Dasgupta, it's such a pleasure to have you join me on Swell today. So thank you so much for taking the time out. And I'm going to be following this introduction up with a few questions, and I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on them. Mr. Dasgupta, you mentioned in your farewell speech in the Rajya Sabha on the 31st of March that it seems lawmaking is less important than delivery, performance, and facilitation. Can you explain to us what you meant by this, and how would you say Parliament has evolved over the years in terms of its role in public life?
Thank you very much for the question, and thank you very much for inviting me to this discussion. You know, it's often been said that India is over-regulated and under-governed. In the past 50, 60 years, or maybe even since independence, Parliament has formulated an elaborate sets of laws, and along with laws come rules which govern them, which sort of embrace almost every aspect of life. Some of these were necessary, because if you want to a rule-based society, then you need certain regulations. But some of them were completely unnecessary. I think today, as we approach 75 years of independence, what we realize very much is that the scope for further regulation, unless they happen to be on completely new and innovative things like crypto, for instance, there's this whole thing. Yes, that's a new challenge, so therefore rules will have to be made on that. Now, most of the legislation which has been coming to Parliament has been of a clarificatory nature. Supreme Court may have given a judgment, therefore certain modifications of the laws must be necessary, etc., etc. These are not substantial legislation. Not that substantial legislation that doesn't exist. There was substantial legislation about governing Muslim divorce, for example, about Article 370, for example, about citizenship amendments. Those were substantial. But by and large, if you look at a parliament session, it's always been clarificatory. And therefore, the timetable of Parliament has been set so that the people get to discuss lawmaking. Now, if there isn't enough laws to be discussed, some of it becomes a little purposeless. But today, the focus has shifted not so much to laws, but on delivery. How is this thing being managed? How is this thing getting on the ground? And there is a lot of scope for feedback, there is a lot of scope for criticism, there is a lot of scope for everything. The engagement of people's representatives with the executive, therefore, has to take a slightly different form altogether. And my suggestion in Parliament was that we tweak the timetable of Parliament and somehow adjust to the new realities of India.
Mr. Dasgupta, over the last few years, we've seen a lot of controversies around certain bills in Parliament, namely the Citizenship Amendment Act and farm laws. How do you view these two laws in particular, as well as the public reaction to them?
Undeniably, the Citizenship Amendment Act, as well as the farmers' bills, did stir a lot of controversy in India. Let's come to both of them. I had some role in the formulation of the Citizenship Amendment legislation. I was in the select committee which was appointed by Parliament, and therefore had an opportunity to actually examine this thing in great detail. The first thing which has to be understood about it, that there are many loose ends of the partition process. And one of the biggest loose ends, it's hardly a loose end, in fact, it's something which is completely unresolved even now, is that whereas the western part of India saw a de facto transfer of population on the strength of their, not transfer, at least what we saw was that Hindus and Sikhs from what is now Pakistan actually came over to India, which left almost only 1% minorities in Pakistan. In the East, however, this is a process which has been going on in dribs and drabs over the years. We thought it would come to a final conclusion in 1971. It didn't. So we had a lot of people, and at present, Hindus and Buddhists constitute about 11% of Bangladesh. For different reasons and under different things, under different dispensations in Bangladesh, have been coming to India. Now, some of them have come without papers, some of them have come with papers, some of them have forged papers. Now, this is a problem which needs a once-time solution once and for all. And this was a solution which we decided that religious persecution, or those who flee from religious persecution, should get priority in this matter, as opposed to economic migrants. And hence this entire thing, this entire legislation was crafted with a view to Eastern India and to resolve one of the problems of partition, one of the unattended or outstanding features of partition. Unfortunately, it got read as by a section, at least certainly a Muslim community, as depriving them of citizenship. The Act has no provision to take away citizenship from anyone. It has only powers to confer citizenship on somebody. So this misunderstanding led to a lot of agitation. And in fact, the worst thing about it was that it led to a degree of polarization, religious polarization within the country, which was unfortunate. To come to the Farmers' Bill. The Farmers' Bill, we've always recognized, and it's been recognized by all experts, that there are problems of adjusting from an era of shortages to an era of plenty. And secondly, that we need an infrastructure, a legal framework whereby farmers can move from being just dedicated suppliers to the food corporation, to thinking about value addition, to thinking about other things, to thinking about commercial farming, etc., etc. And therefore, this was one of the methods of doing it. It's very interesting that most of the opposition to this came from the very rich farmers who wanted a certain assured thing. Now, assured thing was always there, but I think it's also necessary to point out that there are large parts of India which have very small farmers, and they need a different form of incentives, encouragement. Unfortunately, this opposition didn't take into account that. I still feel it was a good legislation.
Thank you so much for going into such great detail, sir. But, I wanted to draw your attention to a debate that I think the country's been having for several decades now. And I think this is going to be a topic that's going to be continued to be widely discussed in forums, in parliament, and outside, and on TV shows, etc. So, in terms of Hindu and Hindutva, there are members of parliament from the Congress party and others who state that Hindutva is mostly a political force which is problematic. Can you talk to us about what your view is in terms of the difference between Hindutva and Hinduism, if any? And how does this go with the idea of India in general?
I think you're absolutely right in suggesting that it is wrong to equate Hindutva and what might be called Hinduism, although the word ism is really inappropriate in the context of which is why there are multiple areas of faith which are encapsulated within what is called Hinduism. The the person who was most instrumental in formulating the idea of Hindutva was V.D. Savarkar, Veer Savarkar. Now, Savarkar himself was very clear that Hindutva and Hinduism should not be equated at the same time. For him, and I think this is a relevant thing, a relevant observation, Hindutva means Hindu-ness. It has nothing to do with your mode of worship. You can be a Shaivite, you can be a Vaishnavite, you can be, believer in Charvak, you can even be an atheist. And that can even form part of your personal or congregational belief systems. But Hindu-ness, Hindutva, is talking about the experience of Hindus over the ages. It talks about the feelings you have. If you notice that in Western Europe, for example, Christian social democracy exists in one thing, but there is an equally important force which is called Christian Democrats. Now, what is the Christian about their democratic orientation? It is a cultural phenomena, which means that a lot of the culture of that state, of that particular country, is encapsulated by what is loosely called a Christian ethos, loosely. And nobody ever tries to define it in too rigid a term. There is a very interesting and a robust debate which is going on within the European Union as to whether you believe that the various countries of the various member states of the EU are bound together by a set of rules and laws, or are they also bound together by a culture? So it's a very similar sort of a debate in India. And it's unfortunate, and I'd say it's unfortunate, that the articulation of this debate has often been marred by very extreme posturing on both sides. So that the essence of what might loosely be called a civilizational state, the purpose of a civilizational state, the idea of a civilizational state has often been lost. What binds India is not common languages. What binds India is a feeling of oneness which unites Tamil Nadu to Kashmir to thing. And if you want to say that the loose underpinnings of all this, but by no means it's not an exclusive underpinning. The loose underpinning which actually binds all of them together is Hindutva. Along with it, nationhood also comes, modern aspects of nationhood also comes with the constitution. But there are things, but what is India predated the enactment of the constitution in 1950. So therefore, if we are to say that our patriotism should be defined as constitutional patriotism, that is a very partial view. A more realistic view is that India is a civilizational state in which Hindutva plays a very important role.
Shifting focus, Mr. Dasgupta, you come from the state of West Bengal. Can you give us an overview of what the situation is on the ground? You fought a toughly contested election, but what is your reading of the Mamata Banerjee government's performance in terms of the economy, as well as law and order and other parameters?
You know, there are some states in India which have moved from strength to strength, or from insignificance to great deal of prominence. West Bengal, unfortunately, happens to be a state which has regressed since 1947. In 1947, at the time of independence, West Bengal was, and Kolkata, or Calcutta as it was then called, was just a notch lower than Bombay in terms of its importance. It was the undeniable capital. It was the undeniable headquarters of British corporate interests in the state. It had, tea, steel, jute, and a host of very skilled light engineering works. From that, political turbulence beginning from the late 1960s, and which has never really ceased in any way, that has led to a progressive deindustrialization of the state and the reduction of the economic importance of West Bengal. That is an undeniable reality. It's there in facts, figures, everything. Mamata Banerjee didn't create this problem. When she took over after 30 years of left rule, she took over a state which had realized that we need a change of direction. We need to get back into the forefront of development. And therefore, she came with an enormous degree of goodwill, not to mention personal charisma. Alas, she couldn't deliver. That's partly because I think her model of governance was extremely frivolous. Like the left concentrated on the immediate, she too concentrated on the thing. She made Bengal into a wonderful festival state, etc., etc. But the crucial question of investments, she evaded the subject. And I think the departure of the Tatas with their nano factory from Singur in 2010 actually marked a turning point, whereby if most investors said, well, if Tatas can't survive in Bengal, how can we? As a result, there's been no real investments in Bengal. So the size of the cake, if you take population increase, has actually shrunk. And therefore, there's this fierce tussle between who can get chunks of a shrinking cake. And that explains why there's been a great deal of criminalization of the economy. Extortion has become a way of life. Now, along with this, if you take the pre-existing trends of political violence, what we see today is that political violence and criminality have merged in a way that was not foreseen ever in the past. And I think that's really the problem with Bengal. And also we have seen in Bengal a huge demographic shifts in the border districts, which is causing a lot of disquiet. And that the disquiet at present hasn't yet found an adequate expression, but it's simmering. Mamata Banerjee believes that she can win an election on the strength of a dedicated support of 30% of the population, which is the Muslim population. Now, as an electoral strategy, it might be viable, but in terms of the social fabric of West Bengal, what it is doing is very, very dangerous. And therefore, in the coming days, I expect Bengal's politics to take an increasingly more polarized turn, which is not good for the state, which is not good for the economy of the country, and it's certainly not good for the Bengalis who are still there, who haven't yet left.
So I just have one final question. The country seems to be bouncing back from the economic slowdown as a result of the COVID pandemic. What do you see are the key areas of growth and revival? And in the next few years, I think we've got a lot of state elections and in the run-up to the big general election. How would you see the BJP performing in each of these state elections, whether it's Gujarat or Karnataka? And what is your hope for the 2024 election? Because a lot of people have voiced concern that increasingly a lot of the opposition parties are becoming weak and not able to fight elections in the way and form that the BJP can. So what would you say to people who are concerned about the idea that India might not have a strong, robust opposition in the years to come?
The pandemic was a huge disaster for everyone. It set us back. It set the whole world back. It came very unexpectedly. No one really was prepared for it. But I must say that in India, despite the odds and despite certain hiccups, we came out of that pandemic reasonably well, with our reputation intact, with the morale of the people intact. Though there were difficulties, there were enormous difficulties, a lot of people have lost their livelihoods. So the importance of a recovery is paramount. I think what's important is that we create two things. One is we found the focus of the state. We now know, I think everyone is very, very clear in their mind, what is the state expected to do. And we are also very clear what is the state not expected to do. If you look at the relative ease with which the privatization of Air India was managed, why did it happen? Of course, it's because the reputation of the Tatas had something to do with it. But more than that, I think there is implicitly a recognition that the state must concentrate on certain other aspects by creating that welfare, the architecture of welfareism within the country, which can have adequate, efficient delivery processes. So I think the unintended consequences of the pandemic is that it brought a degree of clarity in terms of how to formulate your economic strategy. Today, we have an Atmanirbhar Bharat, a self-reliant as opposed to self-sufficient India. In other words, we are trying our best to upgrade the skill sets, the entrepreneurial instincts of Indians so that they can take full advantage of the globalization process which is undergoing. We haven't chosen the Chinese route. We've got our own route. Maybe it will be fine-tuned even more as the years go by. And some of this is getting reflected in the elections of the state. Yes, it is true that the BJP has, one of the things which the BJP has learned from the experience of the Vajpayee government was that it's important to keep the party structure absolutely well-oiled and intact, even when you're in government. Otherwise, the temptation has always been that, when you're in government, everything shifts, the focus shifts to government and the party suffers. This has not happened in, and I think this is a very important lesson which the BJP has imbibed from that, which enables them to put forward the best foot in any election, whether it's a state election, national election, etc. You can decry it by saying that it's in permanent election mode, but okay, elections are a reality in India, and politics means you've got to be prepared for that sort of thing. Now, as far as the opposition is concerned, this is true. The decline of the Congress has led to the fragmentation of the opposition. So you have multiple regional parties which are strong in their own particular states, but who don't present a credible national alternative to the BJP. When it comes to the national politics, the BJP is seen to be the only viable alternative, and this is helped by the fact, by the towering presence of the Prime Minister, who has in his in the past 7 8 years established a reputation for himself, and he concentrates and in terms of delivery, in terms of governance, in terms of innovation, etc. You may like some of his policies, you may dislike some of his policies, but there is no doubt that in the past few years, Modi has changed India profoundly, and this is being reflected in the approval ratings. And I believe 2024 will see another mandate for Narendra Modi.
With that, Mr. Dasgupta, I want to thank you so much for taking the time out to join me on Swell today. It was such an incisive and enriching conversation, and it was wonderful to hear your take on all these important questions. I'm sure there are going to be very important topics that are going to prop up in the public domain in the years to come, and I really hope to have you back here on Swell to answer them and some of the other important questions that we might have discussed today as well. It's been amazing, and I wish you nothing but the best, and I hope to see you back here on Swell very soon. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for this conversation. I enjoyed it thoroughly, and I hope to see you back sometime. Thank you.